Testing. Okay, we're live. We're live, and what I was trying to do is create a room where people could come in and interact with me, questions, but I could not get Facebook recognize virtual camera to show my screen. So, unfortunately, I don't have a live chat open. What I will have in a minute here is the ability to see your text comments on this. Set this up. Facebook has a bunch of looping features here that's pretty difficult to navigate through. So still learning this. Hopefully this gets better over time. But yeah, we'll be dragging this over to the side window here docked. And then we can talk about this scene. And I kind of prefaced this scene yesterday. So we have an idea of what we're looking at today. Okay, so I'm going to open up this plan, and it's named after one of the models that I built. You can see here, this is a nothing house, just a template house, purpose built for the rendering. I'll pull the camera and take a look at what I've got going on in here. And I want to just discuss how every element in this scene was created. We're going to see a standard view, so it's not going to look as colorful or as accurate as we may have seen in the rendering preview. So you can see here, we've got a really simple setup in this room. And let's just go ahead and note a couple things. One is that if you've been following on my feed at all, we've seen a number of times where I've created these canvases from real canvases by processing pictures and then creating bump normals map and roughness map. Here's a couch that I brought in from probably a 3D warehouse. And then I took this couch into another program called Substance Painter. And from there, I applied I did what's called baking a texture, which is essentially we're processing the geometry as it's coming into a program that's built for texturizing. And so once we've baked in this texture, we've created a geometry so that we can apply some smart materials. And one of those smart materials was a suede. Let me go ahead and click on our PBR ray trace. And I'm going to make a couple edits to the scene just so it looks as good as it possibly can. Right now, it actually looks pretty good right out of the box, out of my base settings for my template plans. Now, you can set your renderings up to have settings that are defaulted every time you pull shots. So if you pull a lot of interior shots versus exterior shots, you can set it up in your defaults so that your physically based ray trace has these settings already put in place. So I like to leave my backdrop intensity very low on an interior shot. And other than that, I cap my max samples. Part of that's just being, having to stream so often. I want to cap how much my hardware is doing as I'm doing it. The other thing is creating light sets. Light sets are a huge part of rendering for me, and we can explain how light sets work. I'll open up another plan. We can look at those. And light settings are probably the biggest problem that I see posted across multiple different forums when we're running into issues. So next part of this is I've got this table. This table looks kind of interesting, right? This table was created, the base of this table, which we'll just do a little walk around here so we can see what we're looking at. Out, pretty cool. This table was created using two different softwares. One is a software called ZBrush, and ZBrush, I liken it to being able to mold a piece of clay. You can take a primitive like a cube or a sphere and just use any number of different 3D brushes and basically add or delete like it in a 3D space so that you're orbiting around the object itself and you're painting along. And if you're in this industry and you're not rocking a 3D connection mouse, I highly recommend it. It's the best way to move around any scene, especially something like ZBrush. So ZBrush was used to mold these pieces, and I'm learning these softwares as I go, by the way. So ZBrush, this was a first attempt at any object, and I think it turned out pretty good. I was pretty happy with it. There's a few things I would have done differently next time. Uh, it's all about knowing the efficiencies of a workflow. So knowing where you can cut off in one software, pick up in another, and get your end product the way you'd like it to be. So I knew that I could do some of the geometry for these objects in my substance painter, which can paint geometry onto something in the sense of adding to your normal map or adding to your bump map. So molded the basic shape, and we can take a look at what the shape looks like. Open this symbol up, or open the object up is fine. And let me just expand this window here. Got a little divider line here. We can expand this. And you can see the geometry on this is actually pretty complex. Actually, let's open up, we're opening up the component. Let's open up the symbol. And if I turn the smoothing down to 0, we can start to see any vector lines that come through. That'll just take a second. Or 10. So when we turn the smoothing down, we'll see all the individual vector lines. It's going to look like a lot because we've got 22. Oh, excuse me. This is 228,000. This is not an optimized item. I needed to take this into something and optimize it because 228,000 is way, way too high. This is not something I would offer to the public. And in fact, it might even freeze us up just trying to process this. So I overdid it in ZBrush. And that was there's my learning curve right there. I thought that said 22,000. So it should be about 10 times lower in poly count. So I did a little bit more than I needed to. But after I brought it into Substance Painter, then I was able to paint wood texture straight onto this object. I was able to paint a concrete texture straight onto this object. So, and we're not going to sit here and wait for this. Kill this scene. Back to it. Enough. Like how quickly Chief loads. It loads pretty quickly now. Here we go. Open our recent files. So I'll have to come back to you with a follow-up video where I recreate that table with a lot less poly count. No wonder it looks good. All right, let's get back into our ray trace. And let's talk about the next piece that's probably interesting in this room is this rug. Now this rug is, similarly, I modeled this in Chief. It was just a simple P-solid that was a square. Just a square, okay? And then the next part of this was exporting it from Chief Architect using the our export menu. And then you can either do, a DAE file or an object. Actually, in this case, we had to do a DAE file. Substance won't take in 3DS files, so I had to do a DAE collada file, that's what it's called. And then once I brought this into Substance, we have a bunch of tools that all I did with this, and it was very quick, was I took a fur brush and I changed my channel to be only on the height map, and then I painted in height on just a square item, right? On just a expanded cube. And then I also had a brush that was a seam like this, and you were able to just paint in this height. And then you can bring it back out and import it into Chief Architect, and it's as simple as that. Now, I'm talking through this, but we're actually going to preview some of this in a minute. We'll get some of these other softwares open so you can take a look at those workflows. But right now, we're just kind of going through the different things that are in this room. I think something that's probably interesting in this room are these pillows. You may have thought that, yeah, no, I can pick up these pillows from a 3D warehouse, but you can actually make these pillows, perfect pillows, in fact, in SketchUp with a plugin called ClothWorks. And we'll show you that. I think I might show you that in this project, as well as I might show you how we did the wainscoting. So these pillows were created in SketchUp really, really quickly. It's a super efficient workflow. And then they're custom molded to this couch. So they're not just generic pillows. You can see geometry is not actually pushing through the mesh on the couch. They're sitting on the couch. They're placed on the couch. So, because it was built using this couch as what's called a collider. And then these were cloth that was brought down with gravity onto their collider. So same thing with this blanket here. Same deal is I took a single plane, I dropped it down onto this couch, and it folded on itself using gravity and any number of parameters like friction, and it created those blankets. So a couple different clever things in this scene. Probably my favorite part of the scene is going to be this wainscoting, and let's just take a look at what's happening with this wainscoting. I'll show you the trick of this wainscoting. I'm going to draw out just a room. Let's pull a camera. And then within this room, we can throw one window in here at daylight. And let's pull PBR. Now I'm just going to search my wainscot. Color room. And I have it saved as a style palette. So this style palette adds that wainscot to a room. Look at that. Oh, and we're missing a texture. That's okay. Check that out. Isn't that wild? Now there's a couple of problems with this, and I'll show you what those are. But before I do, I'm gonna kind of illustrate maybe what's happening in this room so that you understand. I'm gonna pull this wall back, both of these walls back, in fact, if I can get them out of the way of my edit menu. And then I'm gonna do just a continuation wall, and I'm going to curve wall. There we go. And we'll make it a little more. And let's pull that camera again. Let's see what happened. Look at that. It even follows that wainscoting around that curve. Pretty clever, huh? What's happening here? How is this created, right? That's the question. Take a look. It's actually just the material. I know it looks very 3D, but it's actually just the material. It's a really well done material. I'll pat myself on the back. Let's look at the texture. This is the actual texture of this material. It's a screenshot. So, go on the internet, take a look at this process. We're going to go on to, I'm going to pull up another Chrome window here so we can go onto my main screen. I think we did. Okay, so I have this this tab saved, by the way, and you can go ahead and copy paste this. I'm going to drop this into our comments here. Comment in the feed. Okay, there's our advanced image search. You can copy that comment, throw it onto your bookmarks, and the point of this is that I can search for things like wainscot, or I can search for things like a door panel, maybe a cabinet door, and then from there I get to designate how high of a resolution I want. And that's really important. Better material that I want is going to be a higher resolution. I usually pick this one larger than 2 megapixels. Now my searches are limited to that, right? If you actually see up in the top search bar, we've got some parameters here that are, there it is, 2 megapixels, right at the end there. So we're only getting results that are of higher resolution. So let's see if we can't make a wainscot from something else. See what this process would look like, right? There's a good looking door right there. And look, this is even a PNG. Now you can add this to your search parameters, by the way. If you look under color, here we go. Drop down, it's transparent. And then we kind of brought into these options. Look at this one. That one's pretty slick. It shows us our resolution in the bottom left-hand corner, and I can do a save as. Save image as. From there, I have a pretty organized material stack. I'm going to put this in classification of wood, and then we're going to wainscot first. so that it stacks next to other wainscot, and we're going to call it a beadboard. Or we could put a date, something like that. I'm actually still working on my naming. I'm going to redo my mention in my material folders. Now, this is the important part. I want to make sure that I'm naming this something that I'm going to stick with forever, really. So in this particular case, I'm going to modify this and re-export it. But we're actually not too worried about the name right now. I'm going to back up a little bit there. And said this before, if you're in the rendering game or you want to improve your renderings, you really need to learn a photo editing software. And I really do feel like Photoshop is big bang for your buck. A suite of other tools, including tools to do really nice mood boards and presentations and stuff. So, so we just we saved that. I'm going to navigate to it. I keep doing the same mistake here and not saving the pathing of an item I just created. Oh, so here we are. Here's my other wainscot. And in fact, it looks like I named it something similar. So you can see here, we had our diffuse, our base map. Here's our roughness, our normal map. Here's our bump. So we've done this before, right? That's what we were just looking at, in fact. So here's my wainscot. There we go. I want to open this guy up. And from here, I can crop it to this object. Right now it's in crop mode, but if I just hold my control key and click on the image. If you are familiar with Facebook, this portion right here serves as a time marker, if you will. In fact, I'll write it in the comments. See that pop up in the comments in just a second. And we're reviewing a Photoshop workflow right now. So I'm going to hit Control and then click on this. And what that's going to do, click on that image of the layer there. It's going to make a selection that omits all of the transparency in the background. And then I can hit my crop key, C, and commit a crop. Go. Now I just have that item. That's pretty good. A couple little tricks. I like to use the high pass filters for creating bump maps. So, and that's not going to necessarily work in this case, but we can take a look at what that does. I'm going to hit Control J to copy my first layer. And actually, before I do that, let's Control Z back. Let's name this thing. So this is going to be wainscot. In fact, we're going to change this to wainscot 2. So, and then hyphen. And I want to Control A to copy, Control A to select, Control C to copy that, because we're going to use that name again. And then type in my diffuse map. Or I can just leave it. I'll leave it for now, and then we'll name everything at the end by appending to this name. So Control J to copy this. And from here, let's just take a look at what happens when we do a high pass. We get kind of a black and white gradient map, which isn't too bad, right? So it kind of pulls out all that color. Still a little bit of color left over. We could turn this into smart object if we thought we were going to do some edits that we might want to revert from or change. Oh, I'm going to make this a smart object. What that does is it enables me to make some edits and then change those edits. And we'll give you an example of that. Let me hit Control U, and I'm going to pull the saturation out. But I'm also going to make a goof up and pull the lightness way down. Now that I did that, look what happened. Because this is the smart object now, I have access to that setting I just did. If I double click here, I can re-edit this. There we go. I like this. This looks pretty good. Now the last bit of this is I'm actually just going to drop in some height in here, which is that I know that there's a section here that I want to add some black to tell Chief Architect that there's height, right? So I'm going to grab a guide, and that's just by, you have to have your rulers enabled. You can look all this stuff up, by the way. I'm not going to stop and explain everything. I'm just going to give you, hints of what to look up. So you need to have in your view, Rulers need to be shown up to pull those guides. Maybe they don't need to, but that's my method. And then I'm going to bring these guides in. I'm not worried about accuracy right now. This is going to be pretty close already. It's already going to look like a pretty good texture. I'm just bringing these guides in so that they snap to, or aligned with the edge of the raised portion, this face of this cabinet, right? And then what I'll do from there is be able to make some easier selections. So first thing I want to do is make a selection, snap it to this top. And by the way, I just kind of dragged that. I didn't really place it. I just kind of dragged it close to that corner. And because snaps are enabled also in our view, snap, right? Then it's snapped to those guides. Here's the next part. I'm going to make a subtraction, which I could just hold my Alt key and then get close to this other guide. And now I've just selected that face frame. From here, I'm going to just add a solid color. Here we go, solid color. That's all I wanted to do right there. Add a solid color. And there's one other thing I can do here. There's a couple things I could do from here. Now we've designated that this is height, right? This is height pulled away from all this beadboard. But the beadboard itself has some color in that same kind of channel, right? So maybe I need to change this to a darker black, something like that. But there's another thing here is maybe I want a little bit of this wood grain in the texture of this face item. So I could change my, oh, what's the term for this? I actually don't know. I have to look this up. But instead of being a normal layer, I can change it so that it's doing an overlay. It's letting some of this grain through, right? Might be interesting if we want to add that to the bump. So there we go. That's letting a little bit of the grain through. Maybe I want to go to hard light and then change my opacity just a little bit. And that just lets a little bit through. There we go, right about there. So starting to look like a better bump map. One thing I might do is I might invert that selection, or in this case, we can hit my control key. You can see our cursor changed at the bottom corner here, and select the mask. And now I can Control Shift I, invert the selection. Now I'm getting the other parts of this, and I can go back to my layer underneath here, kind of pull out the black channel, because we have black as height. Don't want any height in the part of this wainscoting that's recessed. So because this was recessed, we want to pull out that black, which means I'm going to do a Control M, get to my curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to bring up the black back part. There we go. I'm kind of removing that black, if you will. That's looking pretty good. Now let's just throw this into Chief and see what we've come up with so far. So let's do an export real quick. So this is going to be our bump. This is going to be our diffuse. I can select these two. And actually, this isn't our bump. What we need to do is make a deselect, Control D. I'm going to do a Control Shift Alt E. That's going to stamp what Photoshop sees in front of it. Now I can name this at wainscot. Go to bump. Actually, the bump. The other ones were just used to create the bump. And group these two layers, Control G. Okay, so I want to select these two, right click, export as, and we're going to select a JPEG. Doesn't need to be transparent. In fact, Chief fights transparency, so it's not good if you export a PNG and end up with some problems. Let me get to my materials, wood, and that wainscot again, which is right here. Export this. As that's happening, we can switch back to Chief. And let's change this. Clearly, this is already a good looking texture, but let's see if we can recreate that texture just on the fly. By the way, I haven't practiced this. This is just me putting my knowledge to use, right? So, and yet again, when I exported and I was in that folder, I could have saved the pathing, but I didn't. So it's a bad habit of mine. I got to get used to breaking that habit. So I need to copy this right here so I can get to it easily. Or we could simply just add it to right click on pin to quick access, and it's going to show up here in my sidebar right there if we're on a Windows machine. Hopefully you're on a Windows machine. I'm using control for a lot of my commands. Okay, so here's our diffuse map, and we're going to have to delete some of these other things so it doesn't get too confusing. Oh, and actually that's not my diffuse, is it? Look at that, it's PNG. That's wrong. What happened here? This guy should not be a PNG. Somehow we exported as a PNG. So let me try this again. Export as JPEG. Here we go. In fact, let's open up a folder and get to that location. For beadboard, and I want to get rid of these. I want to get rid of the PNG here. I think one of them was a PNG and the other one was not. What are we doing wrong there? Okay, export as. Both of these should be JPEG. Oh, you know, I had select all, but all right, one last try. Here we go. Here we are, JPEGs. So back in here, and we can, good demonstration of what happens with a PNG. Kind of screws this up, even if there's no visible. Well, it's because it's not a one-to-one square that it does this. All right, that looks a lot better. And then in our bump map, let's grab this and see how well we did just on the fly. Again, didn't practice this. You're seeing it as I do it. That's okay, and let's see what it looks like in the room. Actually not too bad without too much work already. So a couple things, we probably want to create more of a seamless texture, right? And then we're running into some issues with the gloss. If we turn gloss off, and keep in mind, issues with gloss will usually iron themselves out if you increase your sample rate on your image exports. A lot of times, if you pump it up to something like 5,000, a lot of times those glaring issues where we're seeing way too much gloss in our bump maps, right? Those issues can get ironed out when you increase your sample rate. All right, so I'm going to take out this roughness, and we're going to crank this up to something like 90. Around 90 is good for kind of limiting how much gloss hits one of these channels. And we were a little bit aggressive on the bump on the wood grain itself, so we're going to go back and fix that. Let me switch to standard rendering mode. We're going to get back into Photoshop. So back in Photoshop, and hopefully, if you're chiming in, you're coming into this, you're following along. Didn't get a lot of notice on this feed. Unfortunately, one of my posts got removed by a moderator, so we weren't able to give people enough chance to come in here at the right time. But anyways, if you're just coming in, we've created this wainscot just by grabbing this from the internet, and that's what we're working on right now. So let me back up a little bit. I'm going to bring in the actual screen clipping by adding it to the top of my layer stack. And I'm also probably going to delete these guides so that we can see better, or at least make them not visible at the time. I don't have a hotkey for that set up yet. So here's our diffuse map, and a couple things to note is that we haven't yet set up a seamless texture here for wainscoting. In fact, I want to kind of cut out these sides, right? And an easy way to do this would be to just start with a crop, and we can bring these in. And this seems simple enough, right? Very simple process. We could cut right down the middle of these, right down the middle of our styles, and press check. So that's a crop. Now I want to check that crop and make sure that it piles correctly. So I'm going to get into other and offset, and I'm going to give this 0-inch vertical offset, I want that to remain the same, but we can change our horizontal offset, and it's going to show us where that seam existed. And from here, I can kind of play with this, right? And probably the easiest workflow is just going into our spot healing brush. And I'm holding Alt and changing the size of my brush. And then I can here, click here with the Shift key and start to see how many samples it's going to pull from this scene to kind of iron out the difference between these two. And that did a pretty good job as far as the seam's concerned. We still have some color variation, so maybe I want to move to a clone stamp tool. This is all part of it. Now I can usually do this texture in about 20 minutes without having to explain it. So as you get better at this, it moves along rather quickly. So all I'm doing is cloning from there. I might hit the number 3 key to change my opacity to 30%. And then I'm bringing that clone over just a little bit. And, it brought in some little discrepancy there. I could switch back to my spot healing brush and get rid of that pretty simply. And kind of just brush these things out. Changing my brush sizes. These are all things you can look up rather easily and iron this out. And now we're starting to see seamless texture. Let's bring this back. Change my offset back to 0. I'd like to just see that main shot again. That committed, did it? Offset is 0. Oh, I needed to remember the offset in the first place. Would have been helpful, huh? Shoot. See, I'm learning too. There we go. That's about right. And while it was offsetting that main shot, it was also offsetting this one as well. So we still have our bump intact here. Now we created that bump from this group. So if I just leave that group turned on, we can still make some edits. And one of those edits I'd like to make is we're going to increase the opacity on this top black portion. There we go. And now let's commit this to a new layer. Control Shift Alt E. We're going to call it that wainscot bump. And re-export these. Yes. Okay. Or, yep. And it's automatically going to overwrite. Now we can come back in here. And this should look even better than the last time. In fact, because it's in the same location, it will pick it up. I'm not even sure that I need to replace these. I might just be able to press OK. I could just press OK and it brings it in. Now there's still some kind of seamed issue here. And that's something to look at. Probably need to address that. I'm not sure what's happening there. It looks like it's in the bump channel itself. So I might have needed to double check on this. I named it wrong. Yeah, I named it wrong. Here it is right there. I didn't replace it in like kind. So there's our new bump. Starting to look pretty good. Let's turn on a PBR and see what it looks like. Yeah, it's starting to look like something. Now, obviously, we've got some dark and light spots that we could fix, and we could fix that in Chief again. Let's drop a light in here and see what this seems like with a light. Look at that. We're seeing that depth. We're seeing that beadboard. We could get rid of the grain, but all in all, this looks pretty convincing. And you can see here, it's going to wrap that corner. The corner wrap is not always going to be perfect, but it's usually good enough for a presentation. Look at that. This is just the material we've applied. Keep that in mind. So the next part of this whole setup is saving this as a style palette tool, which is that we just need to select in the room itself and create a new style palette. Create new. And here we are. Set our properties. In case you missed that, this is our subsequent menu from style palettes. Set properties. I want to clear. I could leave it selected. It seems to have picked up a lot of things that I might like from this room, but I'm going to clear all. And what I'm going to pick up is moldings, because I have a base molding and I have a chair rail set up. and maybe I even have a crown molding, right? And then the next part, the name escapes me, but I believe that we have a wall covering, which is our wainscot. There we go. And that's it. That's all I need to save. Now when I press OK, it drop this in my library. Right? So if we Control N for a new scene, and we draw our walls again, continuous draw, right click, enough, draw a room, and select my style palette and paint this, and let's take a look at this. Got very quickly I was able to add this wainscot that I just created on this live feed. So awesome. So let's take this back to our original scene. Close all these out, don't save, matter. And here we go. So I put a little bit more care into this wainscoting, but not a whole lot. There's a few things I could fix, you know. I didn't really erase that style in between, so I could have improved upon this. That's simple enough. So a few users asked when I asked to preview this scene, I asked them, what do you guys want to know about in this scene? What's interesting to you? There's a bunch of different interesting elements in this scene. And a couple people said lighting. And that makes sense, no problem. I know a lot of people have problems with lighting, so I'm going to bring this into another scene to explain some tricks about lighting in Chief Architect. I'm going to type a little comment here, viewing lighting, and this is in our live feed. You guys can comment back to me in the live feed if you'd like to have a question or something like that, something to discuss something else that we haven't discussed already. So in my, let's see, project directory, I have, let's see, I have a project I'm working on. Doing this a lot lately in some of my feeds. And it's a perfect example of dealing with lighting within Chief, which is lighting is rebuilt based on 3D rebuild in Chief. So that if we pull a camera here down in this lower room, we're going to see our light sets are such for this standard camera that we're limited to 20 lights. And when limited to 20 lights, what happens when I pull a PBR? Well, the PBR is then built when Chief builds the geometry. So just by pressing that button, Chief just built the geometry for this room. And when it rebuilds the geometry of the mesh of the model here, it's going to determine the light sets based on where your camera is located. So that when we pass by this bathroom, you're going to notice it looks like this light is on, right? Because we're seeing something that indicates that we've got an emissive texture. But in fact, the light is not on at all. It's just an emissive texture. That's it. And that's the effect of the emissive texture, is we get some bloom from that texture. I'm not sure where bloom exists nowadays. I think it's going to be in our camera. So if I hit edit, I can uncheck bloom and we can take a better look at this. So there we go. What we're actually seeing is just the emissive texture. That's it. You're familiar with what I'm talking about? We'll use our adjust material tool. I'll grab this texture. We'll take a look at it and edit. Starting to slow down here as we're live encoding and using PBR. Oh, let's turn my fans on. How about that? Okay, so this is what we're looking at, and bloom is enabled in our preview window here, as you can see. So, and then in our properties, we can see that this is a custom emissive texture, and there are the number of lumens that it's trying to recreate. So I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to show you how we can avoid this. Now, a lot of people go into their adjust light settings, which you can get to from the 3D menu. I happen to have them placed on my toolbars. When I click on this, we're going to see that we've got maximum lights set to 20, and our whole house has a lot more lights than just 20, right? And everything is checked on for every room. So what does that mean? How does Chief pick which 20 lights are being used? Well, it's based on where the camera was pulled and the last time the geometry was rebuilt. Now you can force a rebuild in a number of different ways. And what that will do is figure out a new pattern of these lights that it's going to use in the active light set. So let me just show you that real quick. I'm going to come into this bathroom and do one thing. I'm going to place an object. How about that? Let's just place an outlet right here. When I did that, what happened? Look, the light turned on. Why is that? You know, and you might not know why that is. It's because we rebuilt the 3D of this project right when we placed that outlet, Chief Rebuild. So now this light is turned on and some other lights have turned off. Delete them. Guys, if you missed that, the encoder gets overloaded with PBR and then the feed pauses. So I'm just going to explain what I did again. Is when I placed a new item in 3D, what ends up happening is Chief rebuilds, and based on the room that you're in with your camera, it will turn on those lights within that room. Hopefully the feed is caught up and you guys caught up to what I just said. Make sure that this is back on standard. Logging too many resources here. Okay, so back in this shot, we're PBR again. And we're probably going to notice that some additional lights are turned off. One of the main issues with using rope lighting, for instance, is even in standard rendering mode, when I click on my adjust lights tool and we take a look at the rope lighting in the kitchen, we're going to see there's 26 lights, 14 lights, 19 lights. There's a lot of lights to process in here. And when we have our automatic set on for maximum lights, it's only going to pick 20, right? Based on where the camera and the geometry was built. So here's the next part is, yes, we could pump up the lights to 200 allowable lights, and that could get us through. But then you're really hogging resources from your computer and making it difficult to get through and navigate your project. Another thing you can do is establish light sets. The default light set says all lights turned on. But I could do a new set called kitchen lights. And then as soon as I do that, everything's turned off, but I can organize by room and then select all of my kitchens. Same time here. Just click one, shift select, click another, click on. So let's try that again. There we go. Now I selected all lights for just the kitchens only, and this is the kitchen light set. Now if I save this camera, what is it going to do? It's going to associate the kitchen light set right here with this camera. And in that camera, once I save this camera, take a look. We go into the project browser. As soon as I clicked save, we're going to see in our camera section under first floor, that's the camera we just saved. Then you might go through and rename this kitchen camera. That way we have a light setup set exactly the way we need to. I really encourage you guys to save a camera, do not move its position. If you want to move a camera, you should make a duplicate, because if you're doing a rendering and you need to go append some new information to that rendering, you want to have that same angle of camera. It's particularly useful if you decide after the fact that you want to go do a before after shot. And then you can Control Alt V, hold position your camera into your as built and get the same shot from your as built as from your really nice shiny rendering that you just produced. Another part of my shots is a field of view. I'm always editing my active camera for better composition. I might change my field of view to something like 35 degrees. If I can get away with it, I'll even go lower than that. And then kind of do like a little bit of parallelism. Oh man, is that a tough word? Parallelism. Not gonna work. Not gonna be right. All right, and there we go. We're starting to look like a good shot here, right? And I need to make sure that I'm saving this camera again, and then don't touch this camera. A big part of most of my renderings is knowing when to stop in Chief and knowing that I can do something more efficiently in post-edit. I know there's a big sense of pride in creating the best rendering possible solely in Chief, but there's so much more to be had from a quick post-edit in another software. You'll save a ton of time and you'll end up with a better product. So these lights, these pendant lights, for instance, I'm not going to waste any time on these in Chief because it's just not worth my time. I would instead bring these into Photoshop and then touch them up there. Would be nice to make them a gloss at least to start with. But yeah, just a couple little edits here. Then when I get to take this into Photoshop, I'm going to do some better edits. I'll just show you real quick. We'll just do a screen grab. Oh, it looks like we did. Okay. So Control New, I'm going to just paste to clipboard size image here. Control V to paste, and we can start seeing in here. And then in Photoshop, it's really useful to go download a bunch of high-end brushes. A couple of these brushes I created myself. If I hit Control N again, and I want to get into maybe a 2K texture, okay, and these are things I've saved in my presets, 2K texture. And here, I might go into the World Wide Web. Let's go take a look. And that same Google Advanced Image Search, which I posted into the comments, if you haven't seen, I'm going to look up, maybe I'll look up recessed IES profile. Something like that. And I could do any size, but we'll make it larger than 1024. So here's an IES profile right there. And here's what we can do. I'm just going to screen grab this. I'm not even going to save it. I'm going to screen grab this guy right there. Something like that. And then bring this back into Photoshop. And this is fine. I'm not too worried about the texture size here. What we're doing here is creating a brush in Photoshop. And it's a brush that can be used in your renderings. Right? So that I have to remember which way to invert this. Let's see. Do I need to invert it this way or the other way? Let's see. Control A to copy all. In my edit menu, I can do define brush preset. So it is inverted. So let me invert it first. Control I to invert. Now, let's brush preset. Find brush preset. There we go. And light IS, I don't know, something like 3. So what happens then? That's what happens right there. Look at that. I need to clean it up a little bit. You can see here we get a hard line at the bottom, hard line at the sides. So a good way to clean this up is, well, I'm just going to use the eraser tool in this case. Switch to a soft brush. I'm going to make it really soft. A little medium soft there. And then I'm going to erase around the edges of this thing. Okay. And then I'll make it really a soft brush. Get a little more. Now I want to define that brush preset again. And we'll just leave it sample brush right now, it's fine. And there we go. So back into this section right here, maybe splattering of this can on the wall like that, right? Except for, well, I don't want to do it right on this layer. I'm going to create a new layer. And that new layer I'm going to change to soft light. And then when I splatter this on here, it does nothing. Let's change this to a white texture. And it's barely showing up. So we'll change this back to maybe a hard light or brush mode. Normal. We see then. Oh, we must have a selection going on here. Control D, deselect. Oh, we're in a race, that's why. Hey, there we go. So let's change this brush texture to the new one that I just sampled. Sampled brush 5. That's it right there. So if we place this right here, and then change this to soft light, now we're starting to get that effect, right? It could be overlay, we could change our opacity, but now we're starting to get an effect that you can even widen this brush, narrowing it brush. There, you can do this kind of thing. Pretty simple. You can mask out parts of this layer so that we're not overlapping certain elements, right? Little tweaks. stuff like this. Simple, simple. I have another brush that's for a glass sphere, and I can kind of pull in maybe a gray color here. Drop this in. I'm not going to be too accurate because we're just previewing this stuff, but we'll do a new layer. Pull in a gray, and that kind of gives this shape to that bulb, right? Something like that, and then we can erase out little details, stuff like that. So this is all simple. And then a Control-Shift-Alt-E does that stamp of the image that we've just created, bring it into a camera raw filter, and start looking at some of the filters that they have available. And you can really bring some things out of a scene. So they have a bunch of preset filters that you can go through, edit through. Some of these are really nice, you know, bring some different contrast in here. And then knowing the tools available outside of this as well. I might do an exposure channel. And so this is the power of Photoshop with your renderings, by the way. You very rarely see me do a true rendering in Chief and not touch it up and post edit. I used to do that just for a sense of pride. I don't really know why I did that, so I'm not doing that anymore. So I'm bringing the exposure down for a specific reason. I'm going to Control I to invert the mask that's automatically created when you add an exposure layer. And then I'm going to change my brush to a soft brush. And what happens is any place that I paint now is going to, get this out of the way, any place that I paint now is going to be adjusting that exposure. Let me turn that exposure up a little bit more. And now you can see I'm kind of painting in an exposure level on the shadow. I'm getting some depth to this, right? And it's really easy for me to paint in, paint in, paint in places, adding basically AO, right, ambient occlusion, into these spots to get some dynamic contrast. And then hitting my X key, I can kind of clean up my mask where I was painting. So really simple edits you can do to kind of really bring some dynamic shots together in post edit. So back out of this, let's get back into Chief, get back on track. Kind of discovered what's happening with lighting, when it's coming in, when it's fighting you, what light sets are turned on versus not turned on. Another thing I see a lot of is people fighting their backdrop, and that's a valid thing to be discussing, but the main problem there is that I would tell you to adjust your sunlight. Your sunlight is going to change the way that your backdrop is illuminated, and every backdrop has some different properties to them because Chief is now kind of forcing an HDR lighting scenario so that if I change this backdrop to something I've got in my library, one of them, a little shot from Costa Rica. If you guys are ever curious how I make these, they're very simple and they're made with an iPhone. iPhone and Photoshop together can get you a seamless backdrop. That's high resolution. This one came in at like 10K resolution. This is an actual scene from Costa Rica. So now that that's in place, we're going to see that the lighting in this room has changed when we go into a PBR ray trace. And we can start to tweak our backdrop settings based on that. Okay. Now I could drop our backdrop intensity down right now, right? Daytime backdrop intensity, I could drop it down to like 200. And we start to see that backdrop. Maybe I want to increase it a little bit more than that. But before I do that, actually no, let's do that. Let's increase it. I'm gonna increase it to 1,000, even 2,000. Why not? Okay, so it's kind of overexposed now, and it's gonna settle in as a ray trace kind of finds its path, right? But what happens when I adjust my sunlight? We check sun follows camera, and then we want to rotate this. Let's make it like 230 degrees. As we rotate our sun around, you're going to notice that the backdrop changes. Why is that? Because the sun's actually illuminating the backdrop. So now we've got the sun facing us, facing camera. You can see it kind of coming in the window and the door there. And now it's not illuminating the backdrop anymore. So even at a 2000 backdrop intensity setting, we can see the backdrop now just by changing our sun direction. You don't need to change the sun's intensity. You can keep the sun's intensity just the way it was. Just change the direction, because by default, the sun is facing the backdrop, which is then illuminating the backdrop. That's something that I hope they fix, but this is an issue I see a lot of. So if you guys are wondering how I'm getting better results out of my lights, one is creating light sets, where I'm just ensuring that lights are turned on in a scene. Two is that I'm ensuring that my sun is not facing my backdrop unless I really need it to, right? And then I'm adjusting my backdrop intensity based on that. The next thing is I don't actually like using lights in a lot of my rendering shots. If I can help it, I'd rather not have them on. Oftentimes in a daylight scene where we've got enough ambient light in the scene, we don't need any interior lights on. Which means that I'll go in here and get a new set, all off. I always have an all off set. And then I can select everything here. And it's actually already off by default. You didn't need to select anything. There we go. This is a daylit scene. Now, the one funny thing about this is it doesn't act the same way that it should act if it's on and off from here. Typically, that emitter texture will turn off. I'll figure out why that is. I'll have to figure that out at another time. So you might change the emitter texture to be non-emissive for a shot when you don't have any lights turned. All in all, just out of the box, this looks good. Now I use a lot of other tweaks. I typically raise all my cabinets for rendering. I might have a separate plan set that's just for rendering, and then it's a quick edit to just grab all cabinets and raise it up an 1/8 inch off the floor. That makes a difference. Tweak on the reveals in a shot to make sure that they look correct. And then we're just making sure that our materials have good textures in them. That makes a huge difference as well. If you're ever troubleshooting a scene with lighting and you're having trouble with lighting, our feed froze again. Let's do this. I am terribly sorry if the feed is freezing every time we're doing PBR. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but I wanted to just show you guys that if you're ever having an issue with your lighting, you can come in here and edit. This is a simple old trick of mine. Edit your light data. Come in here, turn it bright red. Went over this recently with another team. Turn it bright red, and you might, and then pull back your rendering view again. Make sure that one light is turned on. And see what effect it's having on the scene. And make the properties from there. Really simple way to kind of discover what your lights are doing in a scene. Okay, I'm going to close this guy down. Save anything. And let's take another look at this scene. And then we're going to be closing this video down in probably about 10 minutes. Appreciate you guys watching. If someone's in here watching, it looks like there's a couple people watching. You guys have any questions, comments, just drop them in the comment feed. And I'm looking at it. I'm monitoring so I can kind of have a conversation with you. Then we'll create these pillows. And this is kind of a simple process. So maybe we'll keep the feed going for another 20 minutes. I'm going to into another software called SketchUp. You haven't heard of SketchUp? You should know. You should know what SketchUp is by now. And SketchUp's really useful when you're trying to grab things from 3D Warehouse and they don't look the way that you'd like them to look. SketchUp's going to be a really useful tool for that. So that's a good reminder. Let's go into SketchUp now. Let's get this booted up. Another software I keep mentioning in my feeds, and every time I mention it and it catches a new ear, people are just going crazy for this software. And what it is it's called Connector. But I want to talk about not only Connector, but a few other digital asset managing softwares in another feed. But I figured I'd just mention it now because we're going to utilize it right now. Is in Connector, we have ways of filtering for materials, videos, and 3D objects. And we can filter it by subfolders or main folder stack so that I can see everything that's within a main folder stack, or I can see just items that are within just that folder itself, and then have to click in a subfolder to find out what's in that folder itself. So a really easy way to navigate your 3D and material assets together. And you can throw your project in here. Got a project in here that I was just threw in from another live feed, and we can see here it's filtered by 3D. So it's the filter is on a folder by folder basis. So this project I have filtered by 3D. Super fast way for me to find a 3D model file. Here is my material files now for that project only. And these exist across multiple different folders. So these are the material files across multiple folders. So again, great way to organize your stuff. What I'm looking for specifically is I want to uncheck subfolders here. I only on subfolders, there we go. And now I'm only seeing the things that are living within the root folder. So under couches and sofas, I want to make sure that I'm seeing model files, not materials. And what I'm looking for specifically is this file. There we go. That's the one I want. So I can open this up. I can actually drag and drop this. And that's not the one I'm looking for. Believe it or not, that's one I was working on to create the pills in the first place. And I just saved it because it was a good workflow. So I can search filter by name, which is I'm looking for the Frank couch. So Frank couch unwrapped. This is actually what I wanted. So I'm going to bring this down and bring this into my SketchUp application. Look, you can see the mouse cursor. It's still attached to that icon. When I drag this in here, automatically processing this. Oh, very cool to hear, Sean. Curious to see what software you're working in now, because we can kind of tell you the difference between your software that you're familiar with and Chief. Love Chief. I could tell you that I use a number of different 3D modeling softwares, and Chief is going to be the fastest way for me to model anything in terms of architecture, outside of some custom commercial buildings. So we're looking at residential architecture. There's no faster software that I know of. I was promoting Connector, and it seems like I don't actually have a method for bringing that into SketchUp right now. What's going on there? Should have. Right there. I want to grab it right there. Oh, I needed to do another click, I think. Maybe? Huh. Here I am telling you how great the software is, and it's not working for me. That's good. All right, cool. We get some people commenting. I love this. Um, Alpha. Oh, I'm not doing an import. That's my issue. Not finding the one I want, so let's just open up a different one. AutoCAD and SketchUp. All right, all right. Yes, I'm really familiar with SketchUp, but man, it just does not touch the productivity of architecture in Chief. And I could probably point you to a couple videos to just demonstrate just how quickly you can do stuff in Chief. Yeah, Nancy, I'm with you too. I'm learning new programs this week, and it's cumbersome. Okay, so here we go. want to preview this because this is fun. This is fun for me. This is stuff I do on my free time, believe it or not. Yes, I have no life but this. I love doing this stuff. It's so fun for me. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a pillow. And I bet you I could create this pillow in a couple minutes, but we're going to take a little bit longer than that. So I'm going to draw out just a plane. So, obviously we've got someone in the feed that's familiar with SketchUp. We're going to draw out a plane. You may be familiar with ClothWorks already. And let's just make this, let's make it an 18-inch pillow by, say, 14-inch. And then I'm going to reverse this face. Simple enough. Now, before I just make this into a pillow, which I could quite easily, I'm going to use a plugin called Sketch UV. And what Sketch UV is going to do is I'm going to just apply a UV map to this. And what that does is as I'm creating the pillow, it's going to stretch geometry. So then applying materials to a stretched geometry are not going to look good. So before I do that, I want to ensure that I have a texture already mapped to this, the way I like it to be mapped. So from here, I could just paint a texture on here and it's going to tile according to how it needs to tile. That's simple enough. I might increase the size of this, something like 12 inches. That's easier to see, right? Okay, so from here, I've got an app called ClothWorks. Now I have a paid version of this, which enables a few extra features, and it's well worth it to me because with this plugin, I can create blankets and pillows quite quickly. I can do this in ZBrush as well, and I think Blender has it as well, but I prefer working in SketchUp. So now I'm going to double click this, triple click it, make it a group. ClothWorks, I'm going to make it a cloth. There we go. I right clicked, make it a cloth. Now that I have this as a cloth, I have an option here. I'm going to apply an equilateral grid and put a resolution to it. 24,500 is good. That's kind of an arbitrary number until you really get to know the software. You don't really know what you're doing exactly. And it's good to just make sure that this is reapplied because sometimes when you're applying a new mesh geometry to an item and it's committing to it, you lose the texture. So here we go. We've still got our cloth. And then I'm going to, from here, do something called generate thickness. And 3/4 of an inch, sure, maybe it's like 3/8 of an inch. So now we're generating a thickness on this. See that? And now that we've done that, I want to make sure that I have that color applied as well. And maybe I'll change to something separate on the sides. So just spending a little bit of time doing this part will save us time in the end in terms of making this pillow look realistic with our texture. So now that I have this all set up in ClothWorks, let's open up the ClothWorks interface, this is our ClothWorks plugin right here. If you're unfamiliar, I'm just showing you this because maybe it's so interesting that you have to go and get this same workflow for yourself. For me, it's just something that's fun and absolutely worth the time. So a couple of parameters I want to set here. One is self-collide. It makes it so that we're going to be inflating this into a pillow. So if some of the geometry of this mesh runs into itself, we don't want it to go through one face going through another, vertices crossing each other. So self-collide stays on. I'm going to uncheck preserve shape because that's uninteresting. It's not going to be able to blow up if we're maintaining the shape, right? So I'm going to increase the bend. The bend is basically the angle trajectory of one vertice to the next as we're trying to inflate it. Not a great description. There's actually a good video online, and I'm going to drop a link. In fact, let's do it right now. I've just started doing this. We're going to get to my YouTube channel. If you're unfamiliar, go check it out. I got a bunch of obscure videos on here. But one of the things I have in here is under my playlists on my channel. Now let's see, my videos. Always curious how to navigate here. Buttons change from one place to the next. All right, so under playlists, what I'm watching in January. Okay, so what I'm watching in January is a playlist of things that I'm learning right now. And let's turn that off. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that to, I'm going to add a video that explains how to make this pillow better than I can make it. But I just want to show you the capability. So here we go. We're in here in the simulation. I want to turn my gravity all the way off. And let's just run play because I'm not sure I have all the everything set up quite correctly. So I'm running play. Look at this. That's it. We're creating a pillow. Isn't that wild? I think this is so wild. Um, so it's just inflating this as we go. And hopefully we don't lose our encoder feed again because we're overloading my graphics card. So let me just stop this pillow right now and see where it ends up. Look at that. It inflated it. The texture stayed intact. And all in all, that looks pretty good. Now the next thing you can do is you can take this and kind of angle it and position it, bring it over here, and tell this couch under Clothworks that it's a collider, that it's something to collide with your cloth, and then drop your cloth, the pillow that we just created, right on top of this couch. You can see here I've got one already right here, right? Just drop this, well, dropping it from a little bit high up, but all I did was drop these on the couch and kind of created these creases. Now check this out. When we run the simulator again, I'll just show you another little capability of this. Let me just press play one more time. Okay, so we're in play mode now. It's processing. We can see that. I'm going to click on my, you can see where my mouse is right here. I'm going to right click on this and it brings up a little X. Look what I did. You get to actually manipulate the geometry and the simulation is still running. So Clothworks is continuously running right now. It's going to figure out based on the viscosity of the material, the friction of the material, the density of the material, where this should end up based on what you just did, which was basically, sticking a pin in it and moving it somewhere else. So, and at any time you think that this looks good, you can stop the simulation. You can also have settings, for how the rate of speed, the time stepping, which is, I don't want to get into the minutia of all the details of what all this stuff does. I just wanted to show you this as a preview of things that I did in that scene. So here we go. We're going to stop this. I was able to create the blanket and windows within that software. I will tell you that I created, see where are we at here? Here's where we're at. I did create one of these pillows from ZBrush with its simulation. And its simulation's a lot better than Clothworks, I will say that. And it's got a lot more to it. In fact, you can make a puff blanket in ZBrush quite easily. I just wasn't familiar enough with the UV mapping, which is a big part of this, because without properly UV mapping, and if you don't know what that is, it's a challenging thing that kind of Chief does for you automatically. Chief does something that's called, I think they do like a bicubic mapping, which you can look that term up. But you'll notice when you bring in items from 3D Warehouse in a Chief, oftentimes if you want to recolorize them, you can't do that, and it's because of the way that these things are UV mapped are different from how Chief handles maps. So you want to get into advanced renderings, you kind of learn some of these industry terms that are prevalent in all other softwares outside of Chief. So to make this seem as realistic as possible, we had to UV map our pillows properly. We did that in SketchUp and Clothworks. I ended up doing a lot of modification in Substance Painter for our rug texture. We can take a look at Substance Painter real quick. I feel like we're running this a little bit long, but seem to get a couple of people trickling in. Hello, Kathy. Of course, hello, Sean and Nancy. Love that you guys are here. So I'm going to stop this render again, put this back into standard mode. Let's shut down my 3D warehouse. Let's get some resources back from my computer. And then I'm going to fire up my Substance Painter. Now, this is ZBrush and Substance Painter. If you're not interested in doing this stuff for your own workflows, I'll tell you they're great hobbies anyways. I have so much fun in these two softwares. I find them to be very therapeutic. I loved doing art when I was younger. I kind of lost motivation for things to create with art. So this kind of brings me back into that realm of doing some really fun stuff with art. I'm going to open up a new file here, and I'm going to select some geometry. And I'm not too worried about what I've got. Oh, here we go. Concrete trunk table, sure, we can just start with this. So the trunk table was created in a ZBrush, which is, I liken it to a clay modeling program. And what Substance does automatically is it kind of unwraps the UVs of the objects that you might pick up from 3D Warehouse, which, again, if you're not familiar with that term, it's mapping a complex object with seemingly a lot of different textures that are really just one texture file, and they're located on an image based on the UV coordinates of your mesh. So when you have an object in Chief Architect, like a table, that's a mesh, and there's different projections of that mesh, right? So a table is pretty easy. It's 6 sides. So if I were to just say, I want to apply a material based on a box, that's really simple to map a table in, because it's going to apply a material and close it in from 6 different directions. Now, when you unwrap that, you come up with something like this over here. Well, let's see if I remember all the buttons. All the buttons are different from one program to the next, I'll tell you that. Okay, so this is my representation of my 2D canvas, something that I'm going to be painting on. So this is a material file, is what we're looking at essentially. And it's my geometry mesh unwrapped onto that material file. And this program knows where that mapping is. And all I need to do is come in here in my 3D viewer, and you're going to see if I paint calf skin right here, look at that. It's doing it over here on my 2D mesh, and I'm doing it in 3D. Pretty wild, right? So if I paint this, and I'm going to see if I can remember how to increase my brush width. There we go. We're painting this on this whole portion of this object. Now, say that I only want to paint some texture. I want to paint a fur texture. Let me just type in, see if I have a fur. I do have a fur brush, okay? Now I've changed to a fur brush, and I no longer want to paint that color anymore. I can turn off the color, and I can just paint just height onto this. And I'm going to designate the height right here as well. And I'm not trying to teach you how to use this software. I'm just showing you what's available to you. But I'm going to unload this calf skin. And what I'm going to do is change my height. And now look, I'm actually just painting height onto this. Let me turn off the color. Painting height only onto something that's already colorized. So this is how I'm able to make something like a realistic looking rug in Chief, is that when I export this into Chief, now I have a very realistic looking rug that has a lot of fur texture in it. Let's turn this PBR on again. There we go. So I took this, all it was is a P solid, just a solid P solid, applied a diffuse map, or your base texture, base color, and then brought this into Substance, painted a bunch of fur only in the height map, and brought that material back out of Substance into Chief, applied it to this rug. And that's as simple as that. And how good does that rug look? And have you ever seen a rug look this good in Chief Architect? Probably not. So there we go. We've kind of run the gamut of this scene, which is we've explained basically how I texturized that couch. We didn't get into the details of that. That's for another video, another time. We didn't get into ZBrush on how we created those base tables, that model there, but I could just tell you it's a clay modeling software. Similar tools to what you have in other softwares, where I made a flatten brush, I made a brush to gouge, a brush to add geometry, right, to a mesh. Took that into Substance Painter. As you just saw, that's the object we're looking at right now. Painted a bunch of stone on it, painted a bunch of roughness onto it. We used a plugin for SketchUp called Clothworks to create those pillows and drop them on that couch. And then, so those pillows are molded to that couch. That blanket's molded to that couch. I did those pillows in ZBrush as well, just to prove that we could. We went and created a new wainscoting material which wasn't perfect, but I showed you the process anyways. That's the style palette. If we click in this right now, we're going to see that's the wainscot we produced in this shot. So, and this is just a material region. That's all that is. So really easy to create a library of wainscoting that will wrap around features. We'll tell you it's not going to deal with things where the wainscoting needs to be adjusted or the panels need to be adjusted. This is really just for presentation. That's all. If you need to get into finite details in wainscoting, you're still going to have to model some geometry or something. Last kind of part of this is some of my previous videos go over how I processed all my artwork to show you, how this artwork looks realistic as I bring it into the shot. Pop a light in here. I actually think the need to adjust the bump on this a little bit, but no, it looks pretty good for the most part. And then keep in mind when we have little discrepancies like this in the painting where there's little details that might not look good, a lot of those details are ironed out when you pump up the resolution on your export and you pump up the sample rate on your export. And that's done in our rendering techniques, which you can find in our 3D menu. So just make sure your sample rate's pretty high. I usually use, on a scene like this that isn't that well lit, I might pump this up to something like 5,000. And then that's it, guys. I'm going to jump off the feed. I'm going to get some work done. So thank you for coming in, taking a look at this. Anybody that's coming into this late and has some questions, drop them into the comments section. Please come back to this video because I'm going to be dropping in a link to a playlist. I'll also maybe I'll just drop it in on the Rabbit Design feed. Got a playlist which is YouTube videos I'm watching this month in January because I'm learning new softwares and I'm going to show you what I'm creating with these softwares. So